Welcome to episode 4 of the EmotionTrac podcast. This time we're talking to Seth Price. He's the founding partner of Price Benowitz Law Firm out of Washington, D.C., and also the CEO of BluShark Digital, an agency that focuses on helping other law firms market their practice around the country and locally. He'll be sharing some of his unique thoughts on growing a law practice and marketing it to the public. So let's jump right in. Seth, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate you giving us your time today.
Thanks for being here. I'm glad to be here.
All right. But now you are the founding partner of Price Benowitz, which is a law firm in Washington, D.C., as I mentioned in the introduction. Tell us a little bit about that law firm, the areas that you practice in, and what you do there.
Sure. So for those that don't know me, I'm a founding partner of Price Benowitz. Went to college and law school, UPenn and GW with a buddy of mine, Dave Benowitz. And about what's now 12, 13 years ago, he wanted to practice law and I didn't. So we decided to divide and conquer, and we've created what's turned into approximately 40 lawyer shop, DC, Maryland, Virginia, now South Carolina, all B2C with heavy criminal defense, personal injury, family, and a few other practice areas, and have sort of built the firm on digital. And a couple of years ago, about 5-6 years ago now, I took our in-house team that was running the digital that had been responsible for the growth of the firm and spun that into its own agency, BluShark Digital. And that is the digital agency, one of the top few names in the space that represents between 150 and 200 different law firms around the country with best-in-class digital marketing.
Okay, wow. I mean, if you're able to grow, if you've figured out the game plan for growing a law firm to up to 40 attorneys now, and that was over what time period?
Pretty much over the course of a decade.
Wow. I mean,
we've sort of during COVID, I've taken sort of a scalpel. We're sort of trying to cut back certain areas that were less profitable, and now adding and doubling down on some of the areas that are more profitable.
And expanding, it looks like down the Eastern Seaboard as well.
Yeah, we've had a really good run in South Carolina, and slowly but surely building out that division.
Wow. And so, do you do mostly trial work? Is it what areas do you typically work?
We started off as a criminal boutique that's now a combination of criminal up through white collar. We also have a really strong plaintiff's practice, personal injury, medical malpractice, and burgeoning family law division, which post-COVID has just been on fire.
Oh, wow. Really? I mean, what do you think spurred that post-COVID?
I think people being locked up with their significant others for a long period of time. There was a sort of pent up demand. There was a period when you couldn't really easily get out or meet new people. But now that is, as COVID, particularly in some of the southern states, does not really exist in Florida anymore. We're seeing a heavy demand in that space.
Right. So, I mean, I imagine those are the kinds of things with family law. There's a lot of court hearings and things that ordinarily would be involved with dealing with any of those kinds of issues. And during COVID, of course, the courts were shut down. So,
but that's what's so crazy. A lot of this stuff is now being done by Zoom. So in one sense, it can be very efficient. You're not running around to courthouses. I'm curious, bigger picture, how much stays, as we've sort of said, the genie's out of the bottle. How much of the stuff, how many court hearings that are really not necessarily schlepped down to status hearings will you be able to do by video? Federal courts have embraced it like crazy. And I don't think we're going back to the old ways anytime soon. I mean, I'm not saying that jury trials are disappearing, but I could easily see a lot of preliminary matters being handled by Zoom very nicely.
Yeah, you would hope that if, and we've actually talked about to some other attorneys about that exact subject. You'd hope that if there's any kind of silver lining to, this past year of incredible national strife with the pandemic and really globally, when it comes to the court system and the ongoing discussion of courts constantly being backlogged, it seems like they were sort of thrust into finding a technology solution for making hearings more efficient. What do you think stood in the way of that happening before COVID? Because Zoom existed for a long time, in the corporate world especially.
No, look, I can't speak to there's a lot of people whose jobs and existence are that way. But let's take it back to our world. Like, there were a lot of people that probably could have worked from home, but the level of comfort for us, and I put myself in the middle of older school people, were just not comfortable with it. And this was ripping the Band-Aid off. We got to see what happened, good, bad, and indifferent. And I think we've done a lot of podcasts on my Max Growth Live and SEO Insider. And I think the thing that we've seen is your great employees, were great at home. And some of your crappier employees were even crappier, when they were left to their own devices. And so there's some software out there that helps. Zooms are great. But I'm also starting to see some strain, things that, we now have in some of our divisions, like intake, people who have never worked within the four corners of our building. And from a culture point of view, from a serendipity of training point of view, a lot of those things, you can't, it's very, very hard to simulate over Zoom. Lawyer friends of mine that I play tennis with from Big Law, they love it because they bill their hours, they sit at home, they have no commute. It's the greatest thing ever. That said, they're like, it's killing the junior attorneys because that's how you get trained. And if you're not around, when you're not around other people, it's much, much harder to get that expertise. So I think that there are still some negative consequences yet to be felt, or that are being felt, that we don't really, feel day to day. But like, if you don't have another generation of trained people as well, that's going to be a problem. So a lot of stuff is great. We've seen that we can do a lot more. And are we going back to 5 days a week in the office? Not anytime soon. It doesn't seem like, even if this was over. That said, there are definitely certain, we are starting to feel some of those strains of having been virtual that long, and the hard part of keeping, culture and camaraderie. The two questions. One is, will employees have less loyalty to a place? Because what's their identity? What is their connection?
What connection do they have to it? Yeah.
Right. A, and then B, as you compete for talent, if there's a place that is not going back, so like my digital agency is right now fully virtual. And the question is, let's say you go back to brick and mortar and somebody else is offering them fully virtual, you may have to be more flexible in order to retain great talent. So I think that there are a lot of permutations. It's hard enough running a business. I think it's going to be that much harder. It was hard during COVID. It's going to be hard coming out of COVID.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think we've identified maybe a lot of efficiencies that remote technologies can definitely bring to the legal system, but at the same time, especially because my brother happens to be an attorney, and I think most attorneys will tell you, when you get right out of law school, you don't really know how to practice law yet.
No, of course not. Of course not.
You learn all of that by being in a law firm, and that's got to be a lot harder.
Or going to court. Yeah. And so if you're doing your hearings by Zoom, there's not a guy to sit in the hallway beforehand and say, hey, what do you think? Right. There's that. That's how, the lawyers that don't go to a law firm, they get trained on the, in the courthouse hallways and at the coffee house around the corner. And a lot of that serendipity is not there. And again, it's very hard to measure, but I have no doubt that there will be a cost to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we talked about Zoom, but and I want to talk about BluShark Digital too, because obviously you're well acquainted with technology. What other kind of tech tools do you think law firms should be using right now to make them efficient in their practice?
Well, it's not. It all depends on your practice and your size and a whole bunch of other things. But everybody needs some sort of case management system. There are some that are really, really well dedicated into the PI space. There are some that are dedicated in the non-PI space. Intake software. Most of the case management systems have some form of intake, but not as good as some of the dedicated intake softwares for figuring out what intake software is right for you, what integrates, accounting software, figuring out what works for you. Those things, really important. And depending whether you're billing hours or whether you're flat fee or whether you're contingency, the different needs will change based on that, and then size. But, so I know people who are still on spreadsheets and need to get themselves case management software. I know people that have gotten sort of entry-level case management software, need to move up a notch. And then there are a number of sort of more established companies that are doing a really great job. But I would say the one thing that I've learned over the years is that for most of the more sophisticated software, it's not buy it, set it, and forget it. It's like you need somebody, whether you're paying them a consulting fee or whether you have somebody in-house, somebody needs to be constantly upgrading and training. And if you basically have new people starting and they're not getting trained, you're not getting value from the software. And that often happens. I've had it happen myself. It's like an oh shit moment where you're like, I'm really, I have this great software, but it's not being utilized because somebody wasn't getting properly trained when they came on board. And so I think it's a combination of continuous training and constantly upgrading and customizing for your needs. That's really, really important.
And probably like you said, having an expert whose job it is to help you establish best practices for using those things and getting the most out of them.
Absolutely.
I don't want to get too far in the weeds on the types of software, but with given the fact that we think that there's going to still be a remote work component to the practice of law after COVID, do you see more practice-related software going to the cloud versus maybe at one time when people were just
I think
VPNing into their
the question is what's not going to be in the cloud.
Yeah,
and to a certain extent, I have taken the attitude I'd rather have everything in the cloud because I'm not smart enough. And look, my IT guy is not smart enough. If somebody, God forbid, there's a break-in like the Panama Papers or something.
Yeah,
I know that our people are not sophisticated enough to be able to fight off something that sophisticated. So if Google or Amazon or somebody who's at that level is infiltrated, I can't. That's the most I can do. But the keeping stuff in house, I think, is certainly becoming less and less in vogue. And that the things you could do, and look, the software companies have figured out, and they make more money that way. They're selling seat licenses; it's monthly, it's reoccurring, versus buying software that you might have a maintenance fee on. But like, it's in the software company's best interest, but I think it's also in the law firm's best interest that we don't. There's so many things we have to keep up on, and the idea that stuff is immediately upgraded rather than like waiting for updates. To me, that's huge, and like we're never going to look back on that.
Yeah, you get that collective power when it's a cloud-based software service as a service that you have that collective power of the software developer having the best security you can really have for whatever that software is versus having an in-house IT guy who's trying to stay on top of it and handling a threat individually for sure.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we talked a little bit about the type of law that you practice, and later I want to talk about a little bit about how you've used our EmotionTrac audience insight product. But first, tell me a little bit more about BluShark Digital. What kind of company is it? And you mentioned that that you focus on the legal sector. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So basically, it's a digital marketing agency. We represent law firms and lawyers around the country. Basically, we build and host websites for people, and our attitude is we want people found not just by the people that are referred to you, but we want people who have never heard of you before. And the way to do that is through Google search. Google's everything. So there's paid search, and we work with that. There's organic search, which is a combination of content, links, technical coding, and local. And the local 3-pack, which sometimes a 2-pack of late, but usually a 3-pack, that is sort of the Google Maps, Google My Business, and making sure that people get found there. It's a combination of the organic, the content and links, as well as reviews and everything else that goes into Google My Business, and making sure that, if somebody is arrested or injured or being deported or whatever it is that a law firm represents, being divorced, that they may not hire you, but at least they'll know who you are. So my goal is to make sure that everybody has at least a bite at the apple when people are in need.
You're completely discoverable, in other words.
Right, meaning or more than meaning somebody has a need. And one of my mentors in the space talks about this is consumer B2C lawyers. That's a lot of our world. Business consumer lawyers are like plumbers. There's a hot water heater in the basement explodes. Your significant other is yelling at you. Who's going to take care of your problem? You're searching. Some people are going to go to friends and family. That's great. But a certain number are going to look for instant gratification. That's where search comes in.
Sure, absolutely. And obviously, like we said before, if you have the experience and the success record with Price Benowitz, your own law firm, and now adapting that to be able to bring that same kind of service to other law firms. I mean, that sounds like the place any law firm would want to go. Because I know, certainly having a background in marketing myself, one of the biggest things when you get into, I don't want to say esoteric types of businesses, but certainly the law is a very insulated, type of business for sure. You spend a lot of time just trying to figure out what's important to that business and what matters to a potential customer or client. So if you have a marketing agency that already knows that, already does it day to day, that's the direction you have to go.
Absolutely.
Do you do any, do you do anything else beyond, like, you build their websites, you've got the SEO
We do video, we do social. I mean, it's basically everything that's online. It's bringing it all together, bringing the digital footprint together. Search is really, really important for most B2C people. There's exceptions to every rule. Mass torts, social's really paid social's really important. You want to do branding, social can be important. If you want to do, positioning, there are different things, and knowing what's right for which customer. Sometimes a microsite makes sense. Normally, building out somebody's firm site makes sense, and figuring out what's right. What I love about it, it's like a puzzle, figuring out what the business needs are, and then having a digital solution to get them the best ROI for their marketing dollars.
That makes sense. You mentioned microsites. One area of law that I've seen that a lot is when a law firm is pursuing a class action lawsuit.
The mass torts,
Yes,
where there's something that, now the advantage of that is it looks like you just do that type of law, but it's much harder to get that to rank generally. And so you end up, if you have a law firm and you put a page about that class action on it, you've already spent all that time building authority to your site. You add that page, great. So when you do the microsites, it's not necessarily an SEO best practice. It may be a conversion best practice, and it might be great for paid search because people get there, that's all they see. But there's a back and forth, a pull and tug between, hey, I can just, if I build an authoritative website, I can just slot information in and it'll rank, versus other techniques.
Right. Basically starting over from scratch with a microsite. I got you.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've got to ask you about EmotionTrac, and I think you might be the perfect person to talk about it, because you've used our EmotionTrac audience insight product for your own practice, and you're a marketing guy. So you definitely understand what this product is and how it works. Did you ever do any type of traditional focus groups before you found EmotionTrac?
No, we definitely have used focus groups, and some of my friends in the country are sort of the leading guys on focus groups, and they've sort of mentored me through that world. And it's fascinating. You guys are clearly at the cutting edge of trying to figure out how to make, focus groups are great, but you have 12 to 15 people in a room, maybe. You're able to get much larger sample sizes to help figure out, how to position different issues within a case. I think that's great. My guess is long term will be a place for both in the marketplace, but that it sounds like what you guys are doing is something that hadn't been in the market before.
Yeah, I mean, we have worked a long time at trying to find the best applications for emotion detection and engagement detection, and being able to draw insights out of that technology, and trying to find the areas where those kinds of insights could be useful and could be applicable. Can you tell us a little bit about the times when you've used EmotionTrac, and can you give us a little bit of
I'm at this point, I'm at a much higher level, so I'm not the one who's using it. I just know that from the people that have used it, it has been they're able to get information that they couldn't get at scale before. And I think that, like most things, the question is, like, there's tons of data out there. The question is, how do you use that data, and can you use that to improve the litigation position that you're in?
Right. Yeah. We've been hearing very similar responses from other attorneys that not only that we've interviewed for this podcast, but that we're onboarding with this tool. And I think, we're seeing Some guys are saying that, that it's working for testing out opening and closing arguments. Some guys are saying, it's really helpful information to have going into mediation. I talked to an attorney in our second episode of this podcast that said that he got a lot of useful information about how to best present damages in an upcoming trial. So, it feels like there's a lot of ways to get, valuable information that, one thing that I think is probably different than a traditional focus group is the technology's ability to pick up someone's emotional response before they decide what their emotional response is. I mean, have you ever been in a trial situation where you were reading the jury's faces, and if haven't, or if I myself not being an attorney, correct me if this isn't something that happens, but where you were looking at the jury and you thought, man, I got him, and then the verdict went the other way. When you found out.
To be fair, I haven't had my own caseload for a number of years, but going back historically, yeah, I mean, look, there are always times when people think one things are going, and there's a whole series of people, right? There are people that are experts at the jury selection process, and there's tea leaf reading there, and you think you have it nailed, and turns out it's not, or somebody who's shaking and nodding in unison with you, and then the verdict comes out and you're completely, I've seen, because what I love about it is I get to see it from a sample size, not just of the attorneys at my firm, but all the attorneys that BluShark represents. And so I get a lot of these data points, and it's, it is definitely the more you can crowdsource that information so that you can come up with some rules, and give yourself some idea of what is working and what is not. I think that, the better.
Yeah, sounds fantastic. You're headquartered in Washington, D.C. Is that where you're currently?
I live right outside the city in Bethesda, Maryland.
Okay. I mean, that's obviously a city that even during the pandemic had a lot of people traveling in and out of it, maybe at least more than a normal city because it's the capital. I think, one of the things we're asking everybody now, are you seeing courts start to open back up? Are you seeing trials get, and I know you said you don't have your own caseload, but are you starting to see?
No, that's the whole thing. On the plaintiff side, it's a huge quagmire. A few of the red states are seeing jury trials. It's few and far between. I think we're a ways away from it in our jurisdiction. Courts are open. Things are happening. Jury trials are generally not. So the cities themselves, DC was a lot slower than Maryland and Virginia to allow things to happen. Maryland looks like it's getting, and there are parts of Virginia, some jurisdictions, some counties, there was never COVID. So you just, it's all, situational based on where you are, the geography, and the judges running the particular courts.
Well, so a guy in your situation that's running a law firm, do you have any advice for other attorneys or perhaps other firms about what they can be doing in the meantime in terms of maybe they've been behind on the kinds of technology that we've been talking about, the sort of software that they should be embracing? Do you have any specific advice about what they should be focusing on to sort of prepare for when the floodgates, reopen?
Well, I think that this, like, in one sense, you've had this time. I mean, lawyers are like, hey, especially on the litigation side, if you're not in court, this was a time that you should be getting caught up this is nothing new. Everybody knows these things that are there. So on one sense, it's catch up and make sure that all these things are in place. And on the other side, I think the floodgates are about to open in a lot of cases where it may not be the best time to start upgrading software because, like, if you haven't done it to this point, you probably have a reason that you weren't looking at it. Like, this was the window. So not that you shouldn't always be upgrading and improving.
Right. Yeah. But I guess that makes sense. If you've been spinning your wheels for the past year, then something's,
this was the time to put your software in place. And not that, like, it's always important to be upgrading, always be doing it. But, this is you probably have a few months, depending. The people in the more urban areas probably still are not going to open up fully for a while. You may still have some time, but the world is slowly opening up. And I guess the other thing is you may need different software based on the new normal, like the new normal, I should call it.
Yeah, well, to that point, and also to being able to, if you're a law firm, to be able to reach clients, perhaps that you haven't been focusing on marketing during this past year and a half. how can law firms contact BluShark Digital
Yeah,
get
I'm
help?
pretty accessible. I'm all over online, so always email me, Seth at BluShark Digital, BLU, no E, Shark Digital. It's we similarly Seth at Price Benowitz. I geek out on this stuff, so people know I'm an open door. If you have a specific question, feel free. It doesn't have to be buying anything. Just let me know if I can point you in the right direction. I spend enough time talking to the techies and have a pretty good crowdsourced understanding of what's right for what firm.
That sounds fantastic. And of course, if you're a search expert, they should be able to just search for Seth Price or BluShark Digital, and you'll show up.
Absolutely.
Well, look, I know you're a very busy guy, and I really appreciate you taking the time to participate in this interview. Is there any last thoughts you want to share with our audience before we wrap
No,
this up?
looking forward to hopefully meeting up in person. I don't know when this is going to air, but National Trial Lawyers is first week in May in Miami, and that's going to be sort of the first big one back. And really, just can't wait to sort of see people and have some sort of semblance of normalcy.
A little bit of face to face, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit of face to face. Really miss it.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, then we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Seth Price from Price Benowitz and BluShark Digital. Thank you very much. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.